Really, the importance is if technicians and shop owners and the automotive community at large don't believe in this, we might as well go home.
Ultimately, we know that when the why is clear, the how is easy.
For most areas, we believe in lifelong learning. So we're going to have a compulsory or essentially a required continuing education component annually.
You're listening to the Limitless Leadership Podcast, the podcast designed to help automotive repair shops learn how to lead, coach, train, and manage their team better by sharing proven techniques and thought-provoking interviews from industry leaders. Are you ready to transform your leadership skills by tapping into unrecognized potential to achieve limitless results? Let's get ready for liftoff. It's time to go from great to greater. Here's today's episode.
All right, leaders, whether you're running a shop, leading a team, or leveling up in your career, you know details matter. And if you're like me, that includes keeping your beard on point. That's why I trust the Bearded Brotherhood. Their beard oils, beard balms, and mustache waxes, among other, are made with all natural ingredients, no junk, no shortcuts, just top-tier quality that keeps my beard looking sharp and feeling great. And let's talk scents. Whether it's their best-selling Woodsman or my personal favorite, Lone Stranger, the Bearded Brotherhood keeps me smelling fresh and my beard stays soft all day. If you take your beard game seriously, this is the stuff that you need. And because you're part of the Limitless Leadership Podcast family, I've got a deal for you. Just visit thebeardedbrotherhood.co/lead15 to grab your favorite products and get 15% off in the process. Because a great leader deserves a great beard. Now, back to today's episode. Dave, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Dave, man, I'm really glad that you're here. You are doing some really amazing things in the industry, and ultimately, there's a lot of folks who are watching what you're doing. We all believe in what you're doing, and it may not always feel like that because anytime change occurs, there's often resistance to that change. But go ahead and share with the audience who you are and what you're doing, and ultimately, we're going to get into how we can help because, man, you got some awesome things in the works.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Probably like many of your listeners in the automotive space, I started out as a technician, and that started really early. I had a grandfather that worked for Snap-on Tools, and I grew up on the tool truck with him in the mid 90s, actually early 90s, when the red brick Snap-on scan tool came out. But yeah, I grew up around cars, loved cars, had a little bit of a transition after high school. I went to school for music, and one thing I say about my music career is that you learn about excellence and you learn how to achieve it. And that's something that I think that I've strived for, in my professional career in automotive, but got into the automotive education sector by accident in 2009, so about 16 years ago, and worked my way up from being a high school automotive instructor to a college instructor, very involved with some of the big corporate programs in the OEM spaces, Toyota T10, Honda PAC, GM ASEP. Became a dean of a program at Suffolk Community College, assistant dean. And we had 9 OEM programs there. We were one of the first Tesla start programs in the country. I think we're number 6. But yeah, very, very involved in automotive education. And, in the last 5 or 6 years, deciding what I wanted to do when I grew up, I decided to go back to school and get my PhD, which is something that I'm still working on. But to that point, one of the things that came up in that, I guess you would say adventure or process, right, as my dissertation chair likes to say, is, what is a problem that we need to solve, and how could I look at that with my dissertation work? And one of the things that came up to me, Josh, was as an assistant dean of an automotive program, I had the opportunity to meet with 300 to 400 students a year, right, that were coming into our program, and we had roughly 450 applicants overall. And the question that was always asked was, well, what kind of a career am I getting into? And go back to where I mentioned I went to school for music. That came after being told by my grandfather, who worked for Snap-on, and the gentleman named John Bryant, who I worked for as a kid in a gas station, Texaco gas station, had repair facility. The conversation I had with them was, hey, you're not going into this trade. And I can remember that just being a gut punch at the moment, thinking of, well, why? And their whole idea was, well, there's not really a professional pathway here for a young person. And that was something I struggled with, right? As an assistant dean, I live on Long Island. It's an interesting place because you have the Hamptons to the east and you have New York City to the west. So you have some affluent communities, but you also have some pockets of poverty. And, for the parent that has a master's degree plus, right, the idea of their son or daughter going into a trade was not the easiest sell in the world, right? Especially from the perspective of like, well, what can they make after they take your program? So while I've beat around the bush here for my introduction, hopefully this gives you a picture of why I'm here. But one of the things that I thought that really needed to be looked at was, how do we make this industry a better place for the people that are in it, and especially for the people that are entering it? Because if we do have indeed a technician shortage, which I don't think we do, by the way, it's more of a retention issue. But how do we make this career a career that we're proud to say this is a profession, and that's more or less where the work that we're doing with Avtech is headed. So, I kind of beat around the bush there with my personal introduction, but hopefully you can kind of get a feel for, and hopefully your audience can get a feel for the why of where I am right now in this point as the founder of Avtech.
Ultimately, we know that when the why is clear, the how is easy, and doesn't mean that your journey from leaving your full-time position just a matter of 6 months ago into entrepreneurship has been easy. But we do know that ultimately you are a mission-driven person and you're fulfilling the calling that God has for your life. And I got to commend you for that, man, because again, you're doing some pretty incredible things. You mentioned that like there's not a technician shortage, it's retention. And what we know is that it's costing shop owners 6 to 9 months of a team member's salary to replace them. So it's a costly investment to lose somebody and then replace that person, because we're talking about then having to redo the effective onboarding process and proper training and consistent coaching. All the while, prior to that, you're recruiting, you're hiring. There's so much involved. But 6 to 9 months is just the financial ramifications. It's not talking about the time, the effort, the energy. Let me ask you, what has the last 6 months or so look like for you in driving this change? Talk about the wins, but also we know there's been a lot of challenges too. If you don't mind, share both.
Yeah, I would say the wins are, sort of the confirmation that, your own personal why, right? My personal why for, making change throughout the industry. When people come back and say, hey, this means enough to not just say, hey, here's some support, but we've had financial grassroots support, which has been awesome. So from that perspective, that's been huge, to know that our message resonates with the technicians, with shop owners, with students, educators, right? So that's the most meaningful thing that I think that we've had heard back, in terms of a feedback loop. The challenge is, really, I think could be summarized by saying, like, we're trying to change a system that's, been the same way for many years. Yeah. And I think to that point, the challenge in that is that you're going to get some resistance to that change, right? And it's for a variety of different reasons. But for the most part, that positive energy is what carries you over the hump. But to the point of the resistance, yeah, there's definitely resistance to what we're doing. And it's because things have been so long for this, it's the same for so long, that there are it's the status quo. It's, organizations are set up around that system. And so when you challenge that system, there's clearly some resistance to that. So yeah, it's been a mix of both of those things.
So let's just put it out there. What system are we used to, and why are we able to identify, the current system, we see flaws in it, but it is what it is. It's what we know. It's what we're comfortable with. So let's not rock the boat. How do we shift a paradigm?
Yeah, I think the system that exists right now is, well, what does professionalism or professionalization of the automotive technician career pathway look like? And, in 1969, Ralph Nader went to Congress with a bill, and it was focused on essentially a lot of things going on, but a lot of it had to do with fraud, or people feeling that they were being ripped off at car dealerships and repair facilities. So that turned into a conversation about technician capabilities, and essentially, a lot of the repairs being done not being repairs that were needed because of a competence issue, amongst technicians. So at that point, if you think about it, 1969, there was there wasn't a lot of formalized training happening like there is today. So a lot of the structures that in place have helped a lot of those things, right, in terms of training and the need and awareness for it. But what also came out of that was a certification model. And essentially 72 was the beginning of ASE. And they essentially have been the accrediting body within the industry. They even accredit schools. So, the challenge that we face and, what we're looking at as an organization is what we've done for the last 50 years still working now? And I think my gut feeling, anecdotal evidence, but also research shows that it's probably not. So I think, here's what does work. From the perspective of, is certification valuable? Yes, right? Any type of certification that you invest in is of value. It's going to help you, get a job. It's going to help you, get into the industry. And in fact, Burning Glass Institute, which is a research sort of think tank that looks at a lot of occupational outcomes, they saw about a $9,500 increase in the value of a technician, as if a technician has ASE certification on the entry level. But then research-wise, there's a couple of dissertations that support the perspective of managers. As technicians get more certification, their value has a tendency to flatten or even drop a little bit. And, that's just two dissertations, but sort of the consensus in those two dissertations was, well, managers don't really think about a cognitive exam indicating that they can perform better on the job. So in other words, if I go and take a test, right, even though I took a test that was set to a standard, it doesn't necessarily mean that I can do more when I get back to work.
Right.
Right. It means, hey, you know what? I invested in myself. I took the test. I prepared. There's probably a lot of fundamental knowledge within it. I myself still hold and continue to hold my ASEs. But that being said, proficiency testing in terms of performance-based testing is the highest fidelity type of test that you can do for someone that's working in a trade. So in other words, for example, if you're a pilot, right, and you're going to learn how to fly a plane, right, you wouldn't just take a cognitive exam. You would take either a simulated or an actual exam where you have to demonstrate your ability to take off and land, right? And sort of the argument there is, okay, well, which part of that do you not have to know, right? You need to know all of it. So also when you're doing proficiency testing, the other thing that you're doing is you're setting a higher standard. You're not saying, well, you can get a 70 and pass. You're saying you have to demonstrate either you can do this or you can't do it.
Yeah.
So, our challenge going back, and it's sort of a long-winded answer, but the challenge going back to where we are as an industry now is what we're doing with AvTech is fundamentally changing the way that we look at professionalization from one of, a cognitive assessment only, right, is where we are right now, to a demonstration of proficiency, right? Now, the challenge to that is, right, it's a lot different than going to a testing center and taking an exam. It's involved, right? And we understand that it's not going to be an overnight change. But that to us is the missing component here. And that challenging, those traditional assumptions that, hey, this is the way that it's going to go, right, is, what I was talking about in terms of there being, there's structures around that. There are, and I'll leave it at that.
Well, no, I mean, this is great, Dave. I mean, you're talking about the introduction eventually of a career path, because you're putting the groundwork in and you're creating the structure. I like the mention of the pilot. I mean, our friend Dutch Silverstein, I mean, he's a former pilot, former shop owner, and he is adamant, as you are and as I am, about proficiency testing for good reason, because you can go and take tests, and to something that you shared, off air, was the focus is really shifting from the content to the performance. And I'll say this, 20 years ago, I was in the Air Force as a security forces member, and I would have M16 firings quarterly. So what I could have done is I could have taken a multiple choice exam. Do you know what the M16 is? I still remember my M16 briefing was, the M16 is a lightweight, air-cooled, gas-operated, magazine-fed, hip or shoulder-fired weapon. And then there's like 4 more minutes after that. But 20 years later, I still remember this. But that doesn't mean that I can fire the M16 effectively. And so I would have to regularly go to the range every quarter and do M16 firings. And that was one of many, handful of weapons we'd shoot as military police. But I want you to speak to the importance of, not only are you introducing proficiency in performance-based testing, but also it's not just a one and done kind of thing, because people can just take tests over and over again. But if that test doesn't change, what good is it doing for them?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. To our thought, what we're doing with AvTech is taking the entire educational ecosystem from sort of cradle to grave and kind of dumping the pieces out and putting it back together. And the way that we envision that looking is, there's a performance-based testing component, but rather than have everyone come back in and retake that performance examination over again, and there may be some safety critical areas where we do retest. But for most areas, we believe in lifelong learning. So the idea of how we will implement this at scale will be to incorporate a continuing education component to this. So where, for example, you take some of these performance-based exams, right, to keep them current, we're going to have a compulsory, or essentially a required continuing education component annually, right? So it's going to, going around structures and talking about structures, there will be an ecosystem that supports this too, right? Because we're not going to mandate, hey, you have to take this training through us. We're going to say, here are people that you can take this training through. Good, yeah. So it completely changes the way that we're looking at education and professionalism in our industry, from one of, okay, well, I'll take a test and then 5 years I'll go back and take it again. And many people have fallen out of that structure over the years. You hear about people saying, well, I haven't had my certifications. I had them at one point, but I never renewed them because after I did it the first time, I didn't see the value in going back. Our thought process is, I think, in how we reshape this, is saying maybe there's not value in going back and retaking that, but there is value in the preparation component of it, which we're not measuring, right? So instead, let's look at what people are investing over the course of their year or their 3-year or 5-year period in terms of their professional development. So that'll be a huge part of what we're doing as well. Sure,
this goes beyond just the check in the box, and it's not beyond checking the box. What I mean by that is, what I'm hearing you say is this protects the customer. I mean, to me, if I would feel a lot safer, and I would be more inclined to go to a shop where individuals have a proficiency testing. Like they've passed the proficiency testing, performance-based testing. It's not just filling in a multiple choice test. So it's not just checking the box, but it protects the customer. It also does. I really like the idea of creating the career path, because ultimately you're laying the groundwork and you're creating that structure. You're putting the four walls on this house that can give them a career path. And the professionalization of it, I think, was a great way to describe it. I want to go back to something you shared earlier, because I wasn't expecting you to talk about your career in music, but I think this is a good segue into what a lot of business owners, regardless of the industry, but entrepreneurs as well, and probably both one of the same. But let's talk about a work-life. It's not even a work-life balance. We're talking about, I'm talking to a musician, work-life harmony, right? There's a work-life harmony, because it's not necessarily a balance. It's never going to be an equal balance, but we do have to maintain and strategically go through and grow through a work-life harmony, if you will. Can you walk us through what it's been like? You left your job, the job that you had, your career, for the calling. And one of my favorite quotes from Steve Harvey says, "Your career is what you're paid for. Your calling is what you're made for." You had a great career and you're getting paid very well, but you jumped into your calling 6 months ago. What has the last 6 months been like for you in creating that work-life harmony that a lot of us desire?
It's been interesting, right? Because they say once you kind of take on this entrepreneurship thing, it's a 24/7 endeavor. And I think the challenge in that, and really for any leader, it's trying to figure out a balance, right? It's also, taking highs and lows and trying to balance those even through the course of single days. And it's been a learning curve for me, to be completely honest with you. I was a leader in higher education, and that looked very different because every week I had a paycheck, right? And that was sort of consistent. And, to that extent, that's the challenge, and for me right now, our 501c3 Avtech is a new organization. We're kind of in a pre-revenue phase. So I am keeping myself afloat with doing a lot of training work. So I do have a training company also. And, that's essentially keeping the lights on so that we can, build Avtech as a quality program. It's not going to be something that we're looking to rush to market per se. But yeah, to your point about work-life balance, it's a challenge. I have two small children. I have a wife, and we just got back. Actually, we went away for a couple of days. One of the benefits of flying all over the country is you get all sorts of airline rewards points. So we went down to Florida for a couple of days just to kind of take a mental break and a pause from things, and that's much needed, right? Sometimes taking a step away from things for a moment just to regroup and not think about things for a couple of days is helpful. But yeah, it's a daily and weekly challenge of time management, scheduling, having a young family. I know you have one as well, and balancing, lacrosse practice, 2 nights a week, and games, and piano lessons, right? So all of those things come into play, but it's really kind of forced me to be pretty deliberate in terms of what I'm doing, day to day in terms of time management. I'm sure those are things that you talk a lot about with your audience, but just managing time, really kind of having an idea before the week starts, kind of going through what are the to-dos for that week, where do they fit? Sometimes it's putting things on the back burner too, right? That don't need to be dealt with immediately, and saying, but that's just all part of it, is learning how to juggle all these things and figure out what's priority, and maintaining a balance at home and a work-life balance. So yeah, I won't say it's easy, but it's.
I can relate, and and props to you for recognizing the importance of setting and keeping boundaries and giving yourself the mental break, being able to go to Florida and enjoy some quality time with the family. It's important, because what you did was you transitioned from leading a team to really leading yourself first and foremost. And massive endeavor that you have ahead of you. I'll ask you, because this is a leadership podcast. You're going from team leadership to self-leadership, but what does leadership as a whole mean to you?
I think a leader is, I think in training and education, we talk about leaders and we talk about managers. I think the big distinction is that typically the leader is a person that has a vision, for what the end goal is. And, a lot of times that's holistic into what a leader does. So from my perspective, in my previous role at the college, leadership was building a premier automotive program. And it was something that we continually did. There was no endpoint for it, right? It was continuous improvement, continuous growth. But with that, having a quality built into it too. So, from my perspective, leadership is having a vision for what your organization or what your business should look like, and being able to carry that out through communicating to others what that vision is and how you want it to look. It's sort of in your image, I guess, so to speak, and be able to then communicate that to those that work with you that can help you carry that out.
I gotta say, David, I'm really impressed by the level of intentionality and the focus that you have in recognizing you are really turning a massive turning a massive ship in a different direction. And it requires a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of grit, resilience. And so I want to give you props for that. And I want to remind you that you got a lot of folks who are supporting you and wanting to help. I'll ask you, what are the ways, what are some of the biggest ways that our listening audience and the rest of the industry can help you turn this ship around?
Yeah, I think well, thank you for starters. I think one of the things that I say is, and this is something that I am really intentional about, this is about technicians, right? This is about the people in this industry that go to work every day with a wrench in their hand and have to make a living. And I've lived it. My family's lived it. And, one of the reasons my grandfather said to me, don't go into this industry, because he himself struggled with what was that professional pathway, right? Yeah. So really what I want your listeners to understand is everything that we're doing and the change that I'm trying to lead is about better supporting technicians. It was really about, okay, yeah, I'm the dean at the community college and I have to communicate to parents and tell them what type of an industry that they're getting into. So to me, this is about making our industry better, making our industry stronger, giving the technicians more ability to hopefully make a better living through demonstrating those skills. So I think really the help that we need right now is grassroots. It's telling other people about what we're doing. We don't have a huge bullhorn in terms of major manufacturer backing yet. I will tell you, we have interest into what we're doing. I've described this as many times as if you've ever been to like an 8th grade dance, right? There's the dance floor and everybody's standing at the perimeter of the dance floor saying, boy, it would be really fun to dance, but let's just wait for somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And that's the best way to describe where we are right now as an organization, is that there is a tremendous amount of interest, and slowly but surely we're starting to see action. So where we could utilize the help of your audience is there's ways to get involved on our website. We have some founding partner levels, which can be found on avtech.org. So in terms of monetary support, but even beyond the monetary support, and that is important, right? As we're trying to build some infrastructure in terms of technology to support our plans. Really, the importance is if technicians and shop owners and the automotive community at large don't believe in this, we might as well go home. Right. So I think the biggest thing that we can get from your listeners is tell somebody about this. Make this an organic movement. Really, that's what we feel it is, to change the industry in a meaningful way for the people that work in it. You mentioned the whole 6 to 9 month salary thing. That aligns with what I've seen. I've seen some quotes from Automotive News that quote over 100, I think as much as $120,000 per lost technician in terms of cost.
Wow.
Right. When you look at it from the perspective, okay, there's the downtime, so the loss of potential revenue plus the cost of acquisition, right? Why not just invest in the right people? But I think a part of it is also that we haven't been able to identify the right people, or maybe we're not training them with the right focus. And, I think from that perspective, I think your audience can relate to that in many ways. They may have hired people that they were dissatisfied with. They may have themselves struggled with, how do I get to the next step professionally, and how do I better demonstrate that? So, yeah, going back, the ask is, tell our story. Tell people about us. Tell them about the work that we're doing and the mission that we have. And if that's something that they're interested in, we'd love for them to get involved. We have quite a number of committees forming to develop additional certifications, and would love to have people participate in that as well. But right now it's just essentially telling the news, so to speak, and telling people about the work we're doing.
Yeah. Well, and the news can be found, as you shared, on avtech.org. That's avtecc.org. So go check out avtech.org. I really like the 8th grade dance analogy. Our oldest daughter just had her 8th grade dance this past weekend, and it's I even asked her, I'm like, so were there any, like, did any boys ask you to dance? And she's like, no one danced with anybody. And so it wasn't like, I guess there wasn't any like formal slow dances. And I'm like, what's wrong with the kids at your school, But the good news is, like, to take your analogy, we all know that it's kind of awkward in the beginning. To your point, there is interest, like, it's going to happen. The party's going to happen. Like, eventually that entire dance floor is going to be filled. And so I can't wait to be a part of that and to see that when the dance floor is filled. You have an advocate in me, my friend. I'm looking forward to seeing where this thing goes. And if you're listening, man, get out to the conferences, the conventions. Tools is coming up at the end of May in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. There's the Sunrise Training Expo in Phoenix in June. There's the ASTA Expo in Raleigh, North Carolina in September. There's Ratchet and Wrench, I believe, in October. There's so many amazing conventions, and I'm not even saying all of them. I mean, that's just a handful that we can network together and see if we can help spread the story for Dave with AvTech. My last question for you, Dave, is what is the best advice you've ever received from a coach or mentor?
It's funny that you asked that. One of the best pieces of advice that I got was in my time in music school, and I had a teacher. His name was Jack Schatz. It's someone I'm in contact with to this day. He is a prolific bass trombone player in the New York City Broadway and commercial market. Longtime sub for the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. When I was studying with him at Queens College, he played Phantom of the Opera on Broadway. So, I mean, name it in New York City, he's done it in the music scene.
Wow.
And when I was studying trombone, he said to me, David said, Bach's trumpet player was a farmer. And I said, okay. And that's something that stuck with me now, because much of what you do in the music world, you're not doing for the money, right? You're doing for sort of the mission of, doing something that, sort of feeds your soul and the soul of other people, right, through music. And that really has stuck with me in the work that we're doing now with AvTech, where it's mission driven. And realizing, like, hey, you have to keep the lights on, right? So it's been very, very good advice over the course of the years. And granted, I don't know if that would help your audience per se as shop owners, but I think sort of the message behind the whole thing was we have what we're doing that are our passions. And oftentimes our passions are not great business models, right? So we need to be able to kind of sustain those things until they get up on their feet. And Jack was a person that, that always surprised me because he was always very busy. He was a busy musician, but it was something that stuck with me for a long time. And it's been very helpful in the last 6 months, I can tell you that much.
Oh yeah, man. Well, hey, I'll remind you, you're turning a ship. I mean, you're turning a ship. It truly is a movement. And, you got a lot of folks behind you on this movement, and you're doing it with excellence too. Something that you shared earlier in this episode is your intentionality and the way that you do things is with excellence. It's something you learned years ago. And one of my favorite quotes is, I think, from Martha Beck. She says, "The way we do anything is the way we do everything." And everything you're doing is with excellence and intentionality and with focus. And my encouragement is to keep on going, man. Keep on going, keep on growing through it. And you got some folks behind you along the way. So Dave, man, thanks again for being on the Limitless Leadership Podcast. This will not be your last time, my friend.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Josh.
And thank you everyone for tuning in. Every episode we look to transform our leadership skills by tapping into unrecognized potential to achieve limitless results. So have a great day, everyone. Don't forget to smile today. Tell your loved ones how much they mean to you. I'm Josh Parnell, reminding you to keep leading well.